Okay, it is 6 o'clock.
Great, 6 o'clock, good time to begin. Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Brent Cooper, the Community Development Director, American Canyon, and welcome to our second Housing Element Workshop. And we have a terrific presentation by our consultants at Rincon. We have Sarah Howland and Nina Bellucci.
Hey, David.
And we also have William He, also on our Community Development Department. And many thanks to Nicole for pulling everything together to make this happen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
How do I hide the border?
Great, thank you, Brent. Nina is going to take a moment and start sharing her screen for the presentation, and I'll get started then with the agenda and some first steps.
This is how it was when I left, so it's back to full screen. Got it? Okay.
All right.
Hi, bye-bye. There is a
Are you seeing the presentation or the presenter view?
Now it's working correctly. Great, thank you. All right, and we go to the next slide. We'll start with the agenda for tonight's meeting. So we're going to briefly discuss what is part of the general plan, just give a general overview of that item, and then move forward with the housing element, give an overview, and then dive right into the affirmatively furthering fair housing, also known as AFFH. So this is newer legislation, and so we will explain the context in terms of like legislation, how it's included in the housing element, the categories of analysis, and current conditions related to American Canyon. Then we would like to hear more from you as the audience for being able to participate in a discussion activity where we'll ask questions to try and see the current conditions for American Canyon. And then we'll conclude with the next steps and how to stay involved. Next slide. Great. So first off, this whole project that we are a part of is the general plan update. Many of you may know what it is, but if not, a general plan is a comprehensive blueprint for future development. So it's a long-range plan that looks 20 to 25 years into the future, and it includes a range of elements, including land use, circulation, and housing. So though tonight we will focus particularly on housing, this is part of a larger project and a more cohesive, comprehensive general plan update process. So with that, I will pass it to Nina, who is working on the housing element.
Thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, housing is one of the elements of the general plan, and it is the element with the most legal requirements. It's the only one that has to be reviewed by the state of California, the Department of Housing and Community Development. And it has to be updated every 8 years. Those 8-year periods are referred to as cycles. And this upcoming cycle is the 6th cycle. And many of the city's housing grants and funding opportunities are dependent on it having a certified housing element. So it's very important that a housing element is adopted that the HCD will certify. The housing element contains basically these chapters or sections. It provides an assessment of current and future housing needs, identifies constraints on housing production and opportunities to increase production, establishes goals, policies, and programs to address housing needs and constraints, updates policies and programs to reflect new state laws, and then the section we're going to talk more about tonight, the affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis, which is a new requirement. And it identifies fair housing issues and develops strategies to address disparities and opportunities. And the basis of the housing element really is the regional housing needs allocation. which is the process by which the state and regional governments determine how many new homes each city or county has to plan for. The State Department of Housing and Community Development determines the statewide need and assigns each region a number, and then regional governments distribute those between among the jurisdictions. And then the city, through its housing element update, determines how it's going to meet that share of the need. And American Canyon's allocation, share of the allocation is shown in that table. And units are distributed among various income categories. So the city has an obligation to plan for housing at all income levels. And one of the aspects of the housing needs assessment is the community profile. We did talk about this in our last workshop, but wanted to just go over it again for some context for people who weren't there. So the needs assessment looks at demographics and other characteristics, and from that determines where the greatest need is or where a disproportionate need might be. Demographic trends show that the community is getting older and that it's getting more diverse, and it is more diverse than the rest of Napa County. Also has a higher median income compared to the rest of Napa County. Some of the key issues around jobs and housing are that many people work outside the city, so commutes tend to be longer. The average commute time is almost 40 minutes one way for American Canyon residents. And housing in the city is primarily single family homes. And although median home prices are lower than the county in general, many people still spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And that is the typical measure of affordability. So overpayment is an issue in the city, especially for renters. The age and condition of homes is also important to determine rehabilitation needs. A third of the homes in the city are more than 40 years old, which is the age at which we assume homes start to need significant repairs. And just kind of to get a little demographics information about our attendees today, we have a poll. So we're going to have a couple of polls, I believe. So Nicole, if you can get that going. Oops.
Okay, can you guys see that one?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
thank you, Nicole.
great. So those of you in attendance, please participate. We'll give you some time to answer the 3 questions and then share the results. Okay.
And in case you might not have noticed, you can scroll down. There are 3 questions here in this poll.
There we go. Yes, I can actually, can you guys see, I maximized the screen. Did that help?
I didn't see it change, but
okay.
I think it's still okay for knowing that there's 3 questions.
Okay, yeah. So there's only one of you that's participated. There's another person here. So please participate. Your feedback's really important. There we go. I'm gonna give it just another second. All right. I think we're good. I'm going to go ahead and end this and share the results. And we have 2 people in attendance this evening. So one who lives and works in American Canyon and one who doesn't live or work in American Canyon, it looks like.
Okay. All right, I will turn sharing on again. Sorry. Okay, and now you're probably seeing a reversed view, aren't you? Or
Yeah, it's the
presentation
reviews.
view.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not the presentation view. If you escape and then go back to the,
We're just
and
going to
hit the, yeah, if you hit the present button at the bottom right hand of your screen.
No, I know. Oh dear. Okay, apologies.
This has happened to me, and I found that on the upper left, under display settings, I think you can
Thank
switch
you.
them.
You can swap them. Thank you.
It's
Okay,
happened to me.
All right. Well, thank you for participating in that poll. So all of the, gosh, did I turn subtitles on? Yes. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We'll take all the feedback we received at this meeting and in the survey that we'll promote again at the end of the presentation. We'll take that all into account when we're drafting the housing element update. So let's introduce the idea of affirmatively furthering fair housing. Under California federal law, affirmatively furthering fair housing, which we shorten to AFFH, means to take meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics. So that means not just combating discrimination, but also eliminating racial bias, undoing historic patterns of segregation, and lifting barriers. Fair housing legislation includes these three items. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited discrimination against people in protected classes. Assembly Bill 686 is a California law that established that all California public agencies have a duty to affirmatively further fair housing, and it added new requirements to housing elements, which we'll discuss more today. In 2021, HCD released guidance on how to implement that legislation in housing elements and other public agency work. So new legislation now requires housing elements to include outreach on fair housing issues, an assessment of fair housing, an analysis of the fair housing impact of housing being built on sites chosen for a city's sites inventory, which is a component of the housing element, and priorities, goals, and actions that will reduce inequities and account for any fair housing impact of the site's inventory. The assessment of fair housing is an overview of the issues facing people in protected classes. The first area of analysis is the ability of a city to provide fair housing information to its residents and enforce fair housing laws. So that means, I'm sorry, that's a repeat slide. So in American Canyon, the city partners with Fair Housing Napa Valley and the Housing Authority of the City of Napa for fair housing and outreach and enforcement. So the Fair Housing Napa Valley conducts investigations, does landlord-tenant counseling and mediation, education and outreach, disaster-related housing counseling, and assistance to residents of mobile home parks. The City of Napa's Housing Authority administers the Housing Choice Voucher Program on behalf of American Canyon, which it provides direct rental assistance to low-income families, people with disabilities, and the elderly. I think we're gonna do our next poll right now.
Okay, I'll get that going for you. All right. So again, there are 3 questions to this poll. We now have 3 participants in the audience. Please submit your answers and then I will share the results after we give you a few minutes. And you can scroll down again to see. Okay, we're still waiting for one more person to participate. I'm going to give you a few minutes. Wonderful. It looks like everybody's had a chance. Oh, we had somebody join us. Marlene, if you'd like to participate in the poll, we'll give you a few minutes to answer these questions. Okay, it looks like everybody who's here has participated. I'm going to end this and share the results. So four people said that they were aware of housing programs that were described. Looks like it's a 50-50% in terms of how easy the fair housing laws are to understand. And then 2 of 4 people feel that they're very informed of fair housing rights. And 1 person said they're somewhat informed, 1 person said not informed. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to another aspect of the assessment of fair housing, which analyzes integration and segregation patterns in the city. So as I said, American Canyon is more diverse compared to most of Napa County. White and Asian residents are the largest racial ethnic group, followed by Hispanic Latino residents. 84% of households are family households, and households with children are 41% of households, which is higher than the county as a whole. The median household income of $101,792 is about 15% higher than the median income for the county. And 11% of residents have 1 or more disability, and the most common one being an ambulatory difficulty. So that is these are initial findings from our assessment of fair housing, and it just kind of paints a bit of a picture of what the makeup of the community is with respect to these characteristics. And we have a few maps we're going to show tonight. Again, these are based on initial findings, and they're based on census data and other reliable data. So we didn't collect this data ourselves, but and they can be they range from easy to hard to understand, much like fair housing laws. This map just shows the percentage of total non-white population by census block group. So these geographic lines might be recognizable or not, but they're based on census block group boundaries. And I don't know how easy it is to read all of the data on here, but basically the darker colors show a higher percentage of total non-white population. So the dark blue census block groups have a higher non-white resident proportion than the lighter colors. And that ranges from 21 to 40% is the green category, and over 80 is the darker blue category. Another area of analysis that's required is racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, which have a specific definition in state law. And there is no area in American Canyon that meets that definition, but we do still have to discuss the overlap between income and race and ethnicity. So these 2 maps show roughly that the northeast part of the city has a higher proportion of residents living below the poverty line, or lower income households. And then again, these 2 maps, they are broken down by block group, but some of the block groups have the same characteristics, so you won't see the same boundaries. I'm going to move on to disparities in access to opportunities, another required area of analysis. So some characteristics that might prevent access to fair housing are education, employment, transportation, and a healthy environment. We're not going to talk about all of these in depth tonight, but I will show one map that shows opportunity areas, which is a concept developed by and analyzed by the California committee that decides certain funding awards. It's referred to as TCAC, but that gets pretty wonky. But essentially, you can see that there's the two colors. Lighter color has a less positive economic outcome. Darker has slightly more positive economic outcome. And also you can see, hopefully you can see that there's little shaded areas, and that's where some of the city's pipeline projects are located. Pipeline project just means a project that has been applied for entitlements for, but has not been built. So these are projects that are likely to be built. And I think we're gonna do our next poll. No, let's, one more slide. So other aspects of that analysis are overpayment and or cost burden, it's also called, which means what I discussed earlier, where you are paying more than 30% of your income on housing costs. Overcrowding, which can indicate a lack of housing units of a size sufficient for the family sizes in the city. Substandard housing conditions, which may indicate a need for rehabilitation assistance, homelessness, and displacement. We have two maps here that show roughly transit access in the city, which, as I mentioned, is one characteristic of access to opportunity. And that's mostly concentrated, in the middle part of the city, where there are higher quality bus stops. And then Walkability Index, and generally it's the orange is the least walkable, the green is the most walkable. There's a higher category of most walkable that is not present in the city, but this green area is considered the most walkable in the city. So I think let's do our third poll now. We have a few questions on access to opportunity or disparities in access.
So it's open and there's 3 questions. Please begin participating. Okay, it looks like everybody who's here has participated, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So are employment opportunities accessible in American Canyon? 25% said no, 75% said they don't know. Is public transit accessible in American Canyon? One person said yes, one person said no, and 2 people said they don't know. Is American Canyon a walkable community? 2 people said yes, one person said no, and one person said I don't know.
Thank you. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and we're going to start our discussion and Q&A session.
Great, thank you, Nina. I appreciate all the context for affirmatively furthering fair housing. I know it's probably a lot to grasp in such a short period of time. Honestly, it's a lot to grasp in a long period of time. So we appreciate you being able to listen with us as we receive some context and being able to understand generally where fair housing practices came from, how complex and interconnected it can be for our community. And so with that, we are going to have a discussion activity with the mural board. You'll have the opportunity to, at the bottom of your screen, be able to raise your hand. So it's actually not in the reactions. There's just a simple raise hand button. And if you raise your hand, Nicole will help with unmuting. I will be taking notes. Anina will be assisting me with just moderating. And so if you also have any questions or comments that you would prefer to submit through the e-comments, we do have a link available for that. So with that, I will get started with sharing my screen. But essentially, if you can try and use the raise hands or the e-comments, preferably the raise hands just for the sake of efficiency. There's only about 5 of us in this meeting, so we really appreciate just as much feedback and perspective from you as attendees. So just give me 1 second. Screen. Okay. So we are going to start with the first category of fair housing. And it's the fair housing enforcement and outreach. So essentially, as Nina had mentioned, it is the amount of education and awareness of housing rights and housing rights programs. So we are starting with 2 questions related to this topic. It's essentially an expansion of the polling questions of how aware you are of programs, how comfortable and easy housing rights laws are to understand. So the first question is, are there opportunities to create additional or expanded housing rights programs in American Canyon? So these are opportunities for new programs, or if you are aware of a housing rights program that already exists in American Canyon, but has been really successful or could potentially be expanded, we would love to know information about those housing rights programs.
So if those of you who are in the audience would like to raise your hand to answer this question or provide feedback, I'd be happy to unmute you. Okay, we've got Jamie Holder. Jamie, just give me 1 second. All right, I've asked you to unmute yourself, Jamie.
There you go. Does that work?
Yep,
yes.
We can hear you.
So my understanding was the affordable housing parameters that were set by Sacramento and specifically for American Canyon, Napa County had been met, if not exceeded, although there are new numbers for those programs moving forward. I'd like to know, that was information I got as a question I asked the city. I'd like to know if that is the case, if we did exceed the requirements and what the new requirements are and where we are percentage-wise. And then also my second thing I wanted to bring up was the article in the Register last week about the 2030 or 2035 plan for the growth of American Canyon being that we had already met that growth plan, and now that plan is in question. And is that going to be something that American Canyon community can vote on, or is that something that's handled among council?
Do you want, we can talk about the arena a little bit, but do you want to respond specifically to the city's progress, or?
I think I can answer some of those questions. I know William's on the line. He has prepared the annual housing element report, so he could comment on how well the city has done in fulfilling the 5th cycle housing element. The upcoming sixth cycle housing element establishes a new set of goals for housing in the city. And so that would be a new plan going forward. It's been allocated to the city, and then the goal of the housing element is to find ways in which those goals can be achieved. Ultimately, the housing element is sent to the Planning Commission for review, and they make a recommendation to the City Council, and then the plan is approved by the City Council. I believe the answer is we've exceeded our fifth cycle housing element, but I know William has done the annual monitoring. Perhaps he could just confirm that.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. So yeah, this is the last year of the fifth cycle housing element. And the housing element breaks down the housing requirements or criteria into 4 categories. And we've met and exceeded 3 of the 4. And the last one, I think it's like middle income. And we're most likely gonna fulfill that this year. I do want to say that these requirements from the state is for zoning, not to build them. So it's just that the city has to zone it enough for these housing. So.
Thank you, William.
So we have a question in the Q&A.
Okay.
From Jessica. It says, hello and thank you for the presentation. We know that the environments in which people live directly impact health. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to more specifically incorporate health and health equity into the housing element. For example, could we define quality housing, specifically multi-unit housing, to include considerations of proximity to grocery, transit, physical activity opportunities, and smoke-free protections for residents?
That's a great comment, and I'm glad that you asked that, Jessica, because I didn't really explain what some of those scoring mechanisms were that I showed maps of, but the opportunity areas score does take a lot of those factors into account. A lot of funding actually depends on a project's proximity to services and transit. So there are a lot of mechanisms to try to encourage building in places like that. But yeah, it is very important. And of course, from all the way from homelessness being a negative effect on somebody's health to just the neighborhood in which you live affecting your health. Those are all really important issues.
Okay, great. Thank you for these questions and comments. And if there are other opportunities for the additional or expanded housing rights programs, or we can move on to the next question.
Does anybody have any additional questions or comments regarding this particular question? Okay, nobody's raising their hands, so perhaps we move on.
Perfect. So the next question is, what forums and events do you use to stay informed of American Canyon's programs? So, for example, if you frequently use the city's website, or if you use their social media accounts, do you attend certain events or are part of certain organizations that allow you to stay informed of current policies and programs in American Canyon? This could be particularly for housing, but it could be also, as we've noted, a lot of interconnectedness with other topics. So how do you stay informed of American Canyon's programs?
Feel free to raise your hand and respond to this question, and I will unmute you. We have Marlene. Marlene, I have unmuted you.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Good evening. How I stay informed, it's a variety of ways. One is the city manager's newsletter that he sends out via email, next door, and then also via Facebook under American Canyon Happenings. And I think that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate the specific opportunities.
Would anyone else like to provide feedback or let us know how they stay informed? Okay, we've got a question.
Okay.
Mario says the AmCan website and city email updates as well as Facebook.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else? Raise your hand or enter it in the Q&A down below. Okay, it looks like we're not getting any feedback.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the, essentially will be the second and third categories. So because there's a lot of overlap between the integration and segregation patterns, as well as the racially concentrated areas of poverty, we combine these two sections. So the first question is, what areas in American Canyon, if any, there might not be any areas, but if any, appear to have less investment in infrastructure and housing? So we ask this because there tends to oftentimes be a correlation in communities between like segregation and less investment in infrastructure or housing in an area. So we want to confirm whether or not that is actually occurring in American Canyon.
And infrastructure can mean sidewalks, pedestrian crosswalks, signals, bus infrastructure. It's not always just roads and bridges and transit itself, but also the things that support those. And maybe it could also be about the condition of housing. I mean, maybe there are areas where, it's not so much the public realm, but the private realm that maybe has less investment. And, this is just anecdotal observation. Just kind of wondering what people who live there see as they move about their communities.
So once again, if you would like to provide feedback, it would be very helpful for us. Please raise your hand, or if you're more comfortable, put your question in the Q&A. Okay. Nobody? We would really love to hear from you guys, so please. Mario, thank you. I will unmute you. Okay, Mario, I've unmuted you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Relating to this topic, I know, specifically for having these discussions around fair housing and investment, I don't know if in American Canyon there's a specific areas or location where that's true, but throughout the city, specifically relating to infrastructure, we know that depending on the street or road you're on, you might have sidewalk on one side of the street and not on the other. Or the same thing for crosswalks. You might be at an intersection and only certain, not in all directions of the intersection are there crosswalks. So it's really just street to street. It's not any there's not any specific area of the city where it's like in this area we know that's dilapidated infrastructure, but it's just a lot of just missing links in infrastructure. And then especially along Highway 29, we know that that's where the usage there on Highway 29 is just so much higher than the local roads in the city. And so when you are seeing that sort of breakdown of the infrastructure, we know there's also just a lot of empty tracks, housing tracks, or they might be zoned for other uses along 29 that just sit empty. So not necessarily lacking of sort of investment, but there's either bad infrastructure along 29 or just empty tracks. So not any one specific area of the city, but kind of spread throughout.
Mhm. While you're talking about Highway 29, our next question is about like describing the housing conditions surrounding Highway 29. If you'd like to elaborate on more specifically for housing, you said there are like empty housing tracts. If you'd like to elaborate, that allows us to move into the next question, see commonality.
Sure. I don't think it's any sort of mystery that that Highway 29 has seen a mix of development along it. There's no good sidewalk conditions along 29. Some parts of 29 have sidewalk and some don't. So in terms of having a connected network, we know that's non-existent. I actually just walked out. My mom sent me on a trip to go get some snacks from the 76 gas station, and part of that sidewalk doesn't have part of that street doesn't have sidewalk on Donaldson. And so a lot of times I'll see people walking either in the road or sort of in that ditch now that's created there, because otherwise you would kind of have to cross the street on Donaldson and then cross back over on 29, where the crosswalk there on 29 doesn't go into a sidewalk. It just goes to the corner of the gas station. So, that intersection there on 29 and Donaldson is just kind of a prime example. And I know on the conversation I think was 2 weeks ago on the call for talking about the future of Highway 29, access for pedestrian and bicycle access is something that's a top priority. And so I know this question is specifically about housing conditions, but I was just connecting it there for literally 30 minutes ago. I just walked over there down on the street on that crosswalk. But the housing conditions on 29 are either non-existent or they're just sort of those single homes, specifically the home that's there at the intersection next to Rio Del Mar. I think it's also for sale, right? It's a mixed-use commercial property, or that's what it's being sold as. And then, next to that is that giant gravel lot, and then it's City Hall with the parking entrance there. So specifically on 29, and I know there's also the Watson Ranch development that is in the pipeline, and there's another development that's, I forget what street is on, but there's another, I think it's off of Melvin Road. There's a new housing site that's there in the pipeline. So all of that's coming up in the future, I think is going to change the kind of experience of Highway 29. But as it is right now, I would say it's just your average kind of, for lack of a better term, just driving down a boring highway where you'll see, some stores and some shops maybe, and then you'll just see nothing or empty lots, and, missing connected sidewalks.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we do have a comment from Jamie in the Q&A, and it says the areas of infrastructure that need the most concentrated efforts is the traffic and continued increase in crime.
Okay.
Would anyone else like to provide some feedback on either of these two questions? have Marlene. Marlene, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you. So I understand that there is going to be a lot of housing that's going to be built at different levels for different income levels. And I was wondering, I don't know if this would be the correct forum, but just to know that we're going to be adding a larger population to the city, what the plan is in regards to safety, and if there's going to be an increase in police officers, because now we're going to be increasing the population.
I can jump in. Brent, I don't know if Brent, if you'll want to follow up on anything. The city's larger general plan update it's required to analyze things like ratios of population to public safety officers, parks, and other public services. So I don't know, we may not be adding more people than the previous general plan accounted for. I don't know the specifics. And the larger general plan project hasn't kicked off quite as much as the housing element has. So, Brent, I don't know if you have anything else to say about that.
Sure, thank you. The housing element itself has an environmental review which covers public safety and services. And so that will be analyzed as part of the housing element, as well as the general plan update. The city has a contract for public safety services from the sheriff, and it's renewed on a regular basis. And so as each of the contracts are renewed, the need for public safety personnel and equipment and such is evaluated with each successive contract. But apart from that, as this project being the housing element, there'll be an assessment on impacts to all public safety needs in the city.
Okay, great. I hope that answers that question for public safety as part of the population growth. I will move on to the next question, which is, how would you describe the housing conditions surrounding Highway 29? We've included this question because a lot of the opportunities with the sites inventory is located in this area. So we would like to just have clarity and clarification on what the housing conditions are in this area currently.
So once again, please raise your hands or submit your questions and comments in the Q&A below. So your feedback's really important, and there are no right or wrong answers. So if anybody would like to participate, please do so. Okay, we've got a question. Okay, so Jamie says the Melvin Road Housing Project did not meet the city's parking parameters for high density housing based on the number of units and number of tenants. Allocating Melvin Road for overflow parking for tenants seems unconventional or not. Also, the new road to be opened along the city tennis courts as a second access to Melvin housing complex will increase the already heavy traffic condition on Melvin.
Okay, thank you for this comment. I believe that there could be a potential for clarifying the question about parking and parking requirements as part of the housing element. Nina, you may be able to provide some insight on how the parking requirements may be adjusted as in order to allow for housing development.
I don't know the specifics of that project, so Brent and William, if you want to speak to that project in particular, but the city can modify its parking standards. We'll be analyzing the current parking standards as part of the housing element update to evaluate whether they pose a constraint to development. That's part of that constraints analysis. There's various state laws that require a city to reduce parking or allow alternative parking for affordable housing projects or for projects with any affordable component. So I don't know if that particular proposal was particularly unconventional, but it does follow the kind of trend in state law and local policies that allow different ways of meeting parking requirements to allow for more housing for people and cars.
Thank you, Nina. Let me clarify the particular situation. State law, as you pointed out, does allow a pretty significant reduction in parking for affordable housing. And the burden is on proof per state law on the city to prove that there is a health hazard for this or any other development concession that's requested, that they're entitled to request through state law. In this particular case, the city has worked out an arrangement with the developer where they'll provide additional parking on the adjacent city parcel that would enable the project, when you add that parking, to meet the parking code. And so this is a way in which there will be additional parking provided that should make this project have as much parking as any conventional apartment.
Great, I think that helps answer that question.
And
heard someone start to talk.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Nicole.
No. Jamie put in the Q&A, Melvin is not the answer. Is there going to be a relevant traffic study as we discussed in our community meeting in February? What is the adjacent city parcel?
The Public Works Director has a variety of programs that she's working on, both as a conditional approval for this project and as citywide efforts. That probably is a better forum and person to talk to about that. And the adjacent city parcel is one that's that is immediately west of the particular project you're referring to.
So does anyone else have any comments or questions? Oh, it looks like we've got another. Okay, so Jamie is now asking, when is the follow-up meeting for Melvin residents?
The questions that were asked at the community meeting have been answered, and so there is no need at this time for a follow-up meeting.
Okay. All right, seems like we're getting a little in the weeds for a couple of these questions. So I'm going to take the opportunity to move on to the next category, which is disparity in access to opportunities. So the first question is, how do you or your neighbors access good jobs or schools in American Canyon? And if there's also like any limitations in American Canyon that you have to, as you mentioned, there are quite a few people who commute, who live in American Canyon. Any clarity on the access to jobs and education is really helpful.
Okay, so again, if you'd like to raise your hands or type questions in response to how you or your neighbors access good jobs or schools in American Canyon, please do so, and I will unmute you or read the questions.
maybe if that particular question isn't resonating for anybody, maybe just some anecdotes about, how you get to work, where you work. Maybe has that changed since the pandemic? If you have kids, do they go to school in American Canyon? Do they go to school elsewhere?
Okay, so Mario, please unmute yourself.
There you go.
There you go.
Muted? Yep, I can see.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. So in terms of how folks access schools in American Canyon, I'll say this as a former American Canyon high school student. I would normally, I live close to American Canyon, the high school, so I would normally walk, but, just like any other normal suburb, most people are just accustomed to driving everywhere, no matter where they're going. Even if it's down the street, you'll still find folks driving. And so I think there needs to be, and I think this is kind of there's a lot of work being done in terms of infrastructure improvements for the plan for the next few years about prioritizing pedestrian and bicycling access, but I think it'll go a long way to improve the bike facilities in American Canyon. We are a very small town where biking places and walking places would probably be a lot more accessible if there were better facilities to do both of those things. But I think just by nature of, like I said, being a suburb, people drive, everywhere to get to where they go. And so even if it's shorter distances, our built environment is encourages folks to drive no matter where they go. And so I think that's just the reality, especially even just for dropping your kids off at school. People still will either drive their kids or the students, like specifically at the high school, will drive a lot. And I've said this before, since I live right off of Donaldson, there's just so much car congestion in the mornings and the afternoons.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything to add? Questions, comments? Either raise your hand or again, put your comments or questions in the Q&A below. So your feedback, I keep saying it, but your feedback's really important and really helpful to us.
Yes, definitely. And there's also like overlap. So, if there's something that me and like always come back, if there's thoughts as we go over other topics. So I move on to the next question and see if it sparks opportunities and thoughts on schools and jobs. But this was answered in the last question, but there's always room to expand. But are there opportunities to improve access for public transit, bikes, and walking? So I'll include some answers that have been themes for previous comments.
I think we also heard need for traffic calming in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mario has raised his hand. Mario, I believe you're unmuted, so.
I think I am. Yep, I can see the little notification that I'm talking. Yeah, I just want to highlight the countywide bicycle plan, and especially of course, the Bike Here for American Canyon. And one thing in particular, and this won't be a surprise to any of the panelists, but we know that in terms of bike facilities, only about 5 or 6% of folks who commute or travel by bike are comfortable using non-protected bike lanes, which I know is when we have bicycle plans, or any city has a bicycle plan, the priority is to put things cheap and quick, and those are just putting down paint. But paint's not infrastructure, and class 1 bike facilities or protected bike facilities have shown to be the only example where we can actually get folks to travel more by bike. Otherwise, if you have unprotected bike facilities or bike walking infrastructure, right? Like we've mentioned a few times, where we have incomplete sidewalk networks. So making sure that folks are feeling protected is, I think, a top priority. And I think there are some proposed protected bike facilities in the American Canyon Bicycle Plan. But I think, pushing for more, there's an increase, in ATP funding, moving forward in the next few years. And so I would encourage the city to, apply for that grant funding through ATP and see, where we can get some extra funds for those types of bike facilities here in American Canyon.
Thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate that. Okay, great. I know this is generally we've probably hit a lot of the themes. If you can think of more specific areas or more specific topics, or if you have had specific experiences, please let us know. But we'll start with the next question. Are there any areas in American Canyon that have environmental issues, such as air quality or water quality issues, that could impact people living there? So sometimes these environmental topics can reduce access and opportunities for access, particularly when building housing. So if you know of any particular environmental issues in American Canyon that you would like to discuss or identify, we would appreciate it.
We could broaden this a little bit to talk about some of the things that Jessica mentioned earlier. Air and water are not the only things that affect people's health. So if anybody has any other, proximity to something we're not thinking of that might affect residents' health, or maybe even the positive side of this, are there areas where some of those things are more, some of those beneficial things are more present, access to services and parks and open space.
Mm-hmm. So Jamie put in Q&A, it would be nice if there was community emphasis and activities centered around wellness and entertainment, aside from Safeway, Walmart, and very few restaurants. There's not much to do in AC.
That's a great comment.
I know we've gone through a lot of materials tonight. So just any perspective of like your lived experience is really helpful. It's really essential as part of planning to be able to have that validation of lived experience, just going beyond the data, beyond the state legislation. It can be very technical, but in order for a general plan and especially a housing element to be beneficial for a community, it needs to be a livable document. It needs to be able to be reflective of the community and its needs and current conditions. So we really appreciate the comments we received so far. We really would like you to continue participating and providing information. I know we'll also have this activity available on the website after this workshop. So, you know, if you just need more time to reflect, like that's fine. We just really appreciate like having the opportunity to hear feedback and be able to keep identifying potential opportunities, room for improvement, things that are going well, so that we are able to adjust policies accordingly. So.
Okay, we have Marlene. Marlene, please
Yes.
unmute yourself.
There is a couple things, like the prior person stated, we tend to do our shopping elsewhere because there's only Safeway and Walmart for groceries. Also for working jobs, we also commute to our jobs as well because there's not much here. And then as far as water quality, I know we recently received a notice this week that there was an issue with water quality that happened back in November, but we're just recently notified. So I think that's an issue. Why did it take so long to be notified that there was an issue?
Thank you. That's really helpful. That's like, especially for a specific example very recently.
So I just wanted to pop in here really quickly on that water quality notice. There is a phone number on that notice, and I would encourage you to call our water, I'm sorry, I forgot his title, Water Systems Manager, Dominic. The phone number directly is on there. Please call him so that he can explain to you the reasons for that and also answer any of your specific concerns about it. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
sorry. I know that was probably like
an...
No, that's sure that seemed like an awkward moment. Yes.
Yeah, I was like, oh, am I talking?
Feedback.
I just wanted to make sure you knew, don't hesitate to call him because I think your concerns need to be answered and he would be the best knowledgeable person to answer that for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen, for that feedback for follow-up. It's always nice to know for resources with the city, including noticing for being able to be informed. I feel like that's part of the, even like an earlier comment, for being aware of current conditions and housing programs or even just programs in general in the city. So thank you very much. All right, we can move on to, is there something in the Q&A?
There is, hold on.
Okay.
Let's see. Jamie is asking, can someone talk to the Napa Valley Register article last week addressing AMC City wanting to go beyond an increased prior plan through 2030 if traffic crime and an emphasis on quality of life offered in AMC, should we modify and increase growth?
Okay, this seems like a very specific article. So if we'll leave that more to city staff to answer or provide clarity for a resource for more information. Okay. Okay, hearing none, it seems like we should move forward to the next category of questions, continue to relate it back to housing. So the next question that we have is, do current housing options meet the needs of a variety of family sizes in American Canyon? So essentially, do you see for overcrowding? Do you see even there could be options for like aging in place? Like if there's like more senior citizen couples that are trying to find options that meet their income levels and like their smaller family size, like are there housing options to meet those needs? So it could be young families starting out, young single person starting out. It could be senior citizens individually or couples. It could be larger families, single headed households. So it could be a variety of housing, a variety of family sizes, and do those housing options meet the needs? This could also be very applicable to if you have like knowing for multiple generations, if you have adult children who would love to live in the area but don't have the opportunity to. Any sort of feedback on like having a variety of housing needs based off of different family settings.
I don't know if you mentioned this, Sarah, but it could also have something to do with your ability to age in place if you're approaching retirement. Family sizes and life stages, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely, including life stages, yes. This question is also particularly important because as like meeting the RHNA allocation, being able to meet those housing needs allocations is not only just about income. There are a variety of housing needs. So if you feel like there are housing options that are currently meeting the needs, or if there's gaps and opportunities for improvement, like we really need to hear about it so that we're able to include programs in order to meet those needs.
You can, oh, we've got Mario. Mario,
Okay,
you're
great,
unmuted.
Mario.
I think I'm unmuted. I think I'm unmuted, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. I coughed and then I saw my little thing come up that I was talking. Yeah, thanks for bringing up the RHNA allocations. And I know in the last meeting, I wasn't on the call, but I saw the recording and the RHNA allocations were mentioned. And I'd be interested. I know Brent said that William is working on cycle 6. So I'd be interested to see what that looks like for American Canyon. A lot of issues that come up relate to traffic specifically because most people don't live and work in American Canyon. They live here and work elsewhere. I'm included in that. I don't work in American Canyon, although I live here. And I'd like to encourage the city in thinking of with its future housing allocations. And there's no way that we can build out American Canyon the way that it's been built in the past, which is primarily large single family lots, mandated parking requirements that I know was mentioned earlier, I think by Nina, looking and revising those, and cities have moved forward with completely removing their required parking mandates because it increased construction costs. It does create a constraint on building for multifamily or higher density properties. And so I think the plan that's moving forward with Watson Ranch, although there's primarily all the housing in the pipeline for Watson Ranch that's current, that there's more single family homes being built than there are, I think, at the Point multifamily, Lemon Point. Someone can correct me on the on the name for, yeah. You know, there's that one property, but then I think there's already three or four of the lots that are in the pipeline for a single family home. So, you know, trying to have housing costs low, traffic low, but then also keeping single family homes. We know those are all in contradiction of each other. We can't have all those three exist. And that's kind of where we are today, where we have all these constraints on housing and increasing in traffic. And so it'd be great to see the city, we know the city wants to expand and grow, and that's also mandated by the state. See that Watson Ranch development take the shape of what other cities are doing and creating transit-oriented communities. Mobility hubs are also used to name those types of developments. Move forward with that, because, you know, if we have Watson Ranch be primarily mostly lots of single-family homes, that's just going to be, you know, the status quo of what we have now, and it won't kind of bring either of those housing or traffic solutions. I think in the article in the Register, one of the developers said they wish they could make the housing costs lower, but they said, I think it's going to average out to $800,000. It's going to be the starting price for the home. So, so those are just a few of my comments and observations on moving forward for the housing stock in American Canyon.
Okay, great. Thank you for your comment. I'm sorry, I misheard the Watson Ranch, and what was the other property you mentioned? Lemos, Lemos.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So then Jamie put in the Q&A, the question is, are community needs, and she's emphasizing needs, being prioritized? Question. The existing citizens would like to see improvements to decrease traffic and making AMC a fun and healthy living experience. Too much, quote, build out focus, not enough quality of life focus. Build out meaning more and more housing, bringing more traffic.
Okay, so once again, the comment on traffic, and definitely seeing the overlapping themes of housing and increased population and concerns with traffic. So I might place this in another category because it's less related to the meeting the family size needs in American Canyon.
Jamie just added to that traffic and crime.
Sarah, I'm going to pop in here again real quick. Hi, everybody. I realized I didn't introduce myself when I popped in earlier. I'm Jen Kansenbach. I'm the city's communications manager. There is going to be a traffic calming workshop on May 19th at the Boys and Girls Club from 6:30 to 8 p.m. And we'll be putting information out about that in our upcoming Friday updates from the city manager and our social media channels. So I would definitely encourage you to bring those concerns to that meeting as an additional place to express your concerns and thoughts.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Definitely good to always know for like more opportunities for information and participating. And you know, we're focusing a lot on housing. It relates to a range of topics, but it sounds like that workshop is a great opportunity to discuss these more particular traffic and transportation issues.
I've got Marlene raising her hand.
Yeah.
Marlene, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I believe that there should be a mix of housing, not necessarily geared only to one aspect of the population, so you can have diversity. But as we learned from the pandemic, open space is really key, not only in the public space, but even within your own house. The ability to be able to have somewhat of a yard to go to is important.
Mm-hmm.
good comment. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we'll move on to the next question. We're almost done. This is the last category, and I just have this question and one more question. So we'll just keep moving through this. I appreciate the comments as always. So the next question is, are there areas of American Canyon that might have overcrowding or poor housing quality? So I know we've had identified for new housing opportunities and even areas that do not have housing, that there are empty lots. However, this question tends to relate to like the current housing, like what is currently existing in the community? What are the conditions? Are there poor housing conditions? Is the rental market so expensive that there might be more people in a smaller house to be able to afford to live in that house? Are there those types of conditions in American Canyon? And if so, we'd really appreciate your perspective.
So Marlene has raised her hand. Marlene, please unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm not specifically knowledgeable of overcrowding in apartments, but this is more related to parking. Specifically in the Vintage Ranch area where there is the apartment complex right across the street from Walgreens. Parking is an issue. I've even seen residents put cones in front of their house so people won't take parking spots. So I think it's going to be a recurring issue with any apartment complex that is added to the city.
Yeah, I think we obviously can't know, exactly the composition of every household, but parking, seeing overflowing parking can be an indicator maybe of that, and something that neighbors might notice and be affected by.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to point out that when we were going through some of the data, there is a pretty significant percent of the housing stock that's more than 30 years old. Granted, with like the mix of like home ownership compared to renting, that can change the quality of housing and how well maintained they are. But as part of the housing element, we do look at rehabilitating and maintaining the existing housing stock, because as important as it is to continue building new housing, it's also important to maintain current housing. So any details on current conditions would be really helpful. Okay.
I'll just remind people, you can raise your hands or Q&A down below.
I'll just throw one more thing out there that, there are maybe different needs and different resources available for rental properties versus owner occupied properties. So, if you've been a renter in the city and you have experience maybe with a complex that needed some work, or even in a single family home. Again, this is all anecdotal, but can really help us pinpoint or highlight some issues that maybe the data shows, but doesn't show exactly the significance to actual people.
Okay, okay. So, Jamie's comment is not to worry, the parking guidelines can be waived, and you too can have 160 units with tenants parking in front of your home.
Okay, so it sounds like the parking requirements definitely are a hot topic here in American Canyon. Well, it's good to know at this stage in the process, we'll probably be moving some of these away from housing quality questions, but appreciate the perspective that maybe changing parking requirements would not be very favorable. With that, I think we should move on to the next question, which is kind of an extension and follow-up, so I don't know if we'll really receive much feedback, but the last question of tonight is, do you have any recommendations to maintain a stable housing supply in American Canyon? So this is essentially to be able to maintain that existing housing, less about building new housing and more about maintaining the existing housing. As I said, this is kind of a follow-up to the previous question, which we didn't receive a tremendous amount of comment about conditions of current housing. So hearing none, assume that that means that generally overall pretty good housing condition for housing stock. And with that, we will also be having this mural board activity available on the website for American Canyon. With that, I think I should stop sharing my screen, and Nina, we should transition back to the PowerPoint and conclude tonight's meeting and just allow for any opportunity for questions from community members.
All right, so we just have a couple more things we wanted to go through, ways to stay in touch with the project. And you can all see my screen, right? PowerPoint.
Can see it, but it's not in presentation mode.
I'm just gonna skip that for now.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
So we have a couple of next steps we want to make sure people are aware of. So this is our second and final public workshop. And the next step will be a draft housing element will be available for review in June. In July, while that's still open for comment, we'll have study sessions before the Planning Commission and City Council. And then it's anticipated that Planning Commission and City Council will review a document for adoption in January or February of 2023. And if you have questions or comments, you can contact Nicole Jones. Oops, I forgot to put your email address up here, Nicole, but it is, I believe, on the website, which is easier to remember and retype. It's amcan2040.org. You can go there for documents, updates on the general plan project as a whole, but also specifically the housing element. You can find Nicole's address to send her any follow-up comments or questions. And there is still a survey open that you can get to from that website. And I believe that'll be open until May 13th. If anybody remembers and wants to correct me, right ahead. But it will be open for a little while longer. And that will inform the draft housing element in the ways we explained tonight, mostly the needs assessment, the housing needs assessment, and the fair housing assessment. I'm sorry, assessment of fair housing. We reuse the words too many times. So that wraps up tonight's workshop, and we just want to thank everybody for participating. And Brent, I don't know if you have any final thoughts, but I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And thank you all for being here.
Great. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone being here, and I know it can be uncomfortable to ask questions and things, and so I really appreciate all of you for helping us understand what's on your mind. It's important to us to know, and we really do care what you think, and we will be reflecting those comments in our housing element.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think, is that it, everybody? Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Have a great night.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you too.